In days to come, the mountain of the Lord's house shall be established as the highest of the mountains, and shall be raised above the hills. All the nations shall stream to it. Many people shall come and say, "Come, let us go up to the mountain of the Lord, to the house of the God of Jacob, that he may teach us his ways, and that we may walk in his paths. For out of Zion shall go forth instruction, and the word of the Lord from Jerusalem. He shall judge between the nations, and shall arbitrate for many peoples. They shall beat their swords into plowshares, and their spears into pruning hooks. Nation shall not lift up sword against nation, neither shall they learn war anymore. Blessed are the peacemakers, for they will be called children of God." May God add blessing to the reading, hearing, and living of this holy word this day.
Thanks be to God.
When my grandson James was in 3rd grade, we were driving home from church one Wednesday evening. We were stopped at the stoplight. On one corner of that intersection, there was a pawn shop. Big sign out in front. It had pictures of AR-15 type rifles on either side, bracketing the words, "Guns, guns, guns." Well, James stared out the window and apparently contemplated that sign for a while. He turned to me and asked, "So Emma, when are they going to turn all the guns into shovels?" My first thought was, wow, he actually gets that passage from Isaiah. And then I realized I'd have to give him some kind of an answer. You see, he seemed to have the expectation that turning weapons into farm implements was a real possibility, and that it could happen at any time, maybe even in his lifetime. Of course, as we adults often do when confronted with deep philosophical questions from children, I gave the simplest answer I could come up with on the shortest period of time. I don't know. Well, after being informed that that wasn't a very good answer, I had to dig a little deeper and point out that people have been fighting with each other for thousands of years, and it didn't look very promising for them to stop anytime soon. But Emma, the Bible says they will stop, right? Yes, someday. I hope it's soon. Me too, buddy. But there is something that we can do in the meantime. What's that? We can try to be peacemakers in our own lives. Like that time you stood up for one of your classmates who was being bullied on the playground. That didn't feel very peaceful. Well, it probably did to your friend. It was hard to do. I know. I'm not very good at it myself a lot of times. But you still try? Yeah, I still try. But I think God would like me to try harder. Well, you should probably listen to him. From the beginning of earliest recorded history, and most likely before that, human beings have been in conflict with one another and their families, their communities, and their nations. In an article in the New York Times from July of 2003, it was estimated that in the prior 3,400 years, humans have been entirely at peace for only a total of 268 of those years. 8% of recorded history. And this only included wars that were defined as active armed conflicts that claimed more than 1,000 lives. It seems that we've been more in the business of turning our farm implements into weapons rather than the vision of the future described by Isaiah. And it's no wonder that most of us hear these words from Isaiah with a mix of both hope and despair. We have the hope that in some far-off someday, God's peace and justice will finally reign on earth. But we also confront the reality that our world is anything but peaceful and just. And we resign ourselves to the fact that there's probably about it, but wait for God to snap his fingers and make everything right. I believe, however, that there is a middle ground between this hopeful waiting and despairing resignation. Isaiah gives us a hint of that in chapter 2, verse 3, which calls the people to go to the house of the God of Jacob, that he may teach us his ways, that we may walk in his paths. And that seems a really good place to start. We may not be able to control what others do, but we can seek to learn from God and to work at becoming people of peace ourselves. In the Sermon on the Mount, our other scripture from this morning, Jesus said, "Blessed are the peacemakers, for they shall be called the children of God." It follows then that if we call ourselves the children of God, then we're also called to be peacemakers. The Hebrew word for peace, shalom, connotes much more than simply the absence of conflict. Where shalom exists, there is also harmony, wholeness, prosperity, justice, and tranquility. The quality of this kind of peace is beautifully described in the 4th chapter of Micah. The first 3 verses of that chapter are almost identical to today's reading from Isaiah. In the 4th verse, though, Micah describes how people will live in that new, peaceful world. They shall sit under their own vines and under their own fig trees, and no one shall make them afraid. They will be safe, they will be secure, their needs will be met. I doubt anyone in here has the global power and influence to convince even one nation engaged in armed conflict to cease fighting and disarm. Indeed, those original listeners to Jesus' words would have been just as powerless as we are to act as envoys of peace between nations and governments. What Jesus was telling them and us is that we do have the power to work for peace and peaceful resolutions to conflicts within our own social circles. We can work at preventing those conflicts to begin with. We don't always have to agree with one another, but we can learn to handle those disagreements civilly, searching for common ground and compromise, or if nothing else, agreeing to disagree. In our present society, that's a radical, if not a subversive concept. The Chinese philosopher Lao Tzu lived 600 years before Christ, but one of his familiar quotes seems right on target when it comes to what it takes to build a peaceful world. He said, "If there's to be peace in the world, there must be peace between nations. If there is peace in the nations, there must be peace in the cities. If there is to be peace in the cities, there must be peace between neighbors. And if there is to be peace between neighbors, there must be peace in the home. And if there is to be peace in the home, there must be peace in the heart." We cannot become people of peace in our hearts, our homes, or our communities without first understanding the roots of conflict. The writer of the letter of James addresses us at the beginning of chapter 4 of that letter. He said, "Those conflicts and disputes among you, where do they come from? Do they not come from your cravings that are at war within you? You want something and do not have it, so you commit murder. And you covet something and cannot obtain it, so you engage in disputes and conflicts." Indeed, most of our conflicts arise from self-centeredness. Our way is the best way, the right way. And those who can't see it are perceived as threatening and even dangerous. We are jealous of what others have or their way of life. We want more things, more power, more influence, more control. And we are willing to do anything, including hurting or taking advantage of others to obtain it. If we are the ones hurt or taken advantage of, we become angry and bitter. We act out anger toward the ones who have wronged us. Or, if we have the power to do that, we take our anger out on other convenient targets in order to feel like we're reclaiming some of that power that we believe has been taken from us. Of course, the targets of our anger then retaliate, and the cycle continues over and over and over again, spreading like ripples from a stone thrown into the water. This happens on a broader scale between nations who go to war over control of resources, markets, religion, and power. Knowing that we can't really change the whole world, at least not immediately, we're left to start with ourselves and our own hearts. Jesus' teachings gave us a pretty good roadmap, too. He tells us that if we take his yoke upon us, in other words, if we follow him and what he teaches, he will give us peace, peace that will be in our hearts. Jesus teaches us how to rid ourselves of the sources of conflict in our lives. Be meek, not in the sense of being a doormat, but as in being humble and not self-centered. Be merciful. Forgive others as God has forgiven you. Turn the other cheek. Don't repay violence or hurt with violence and hurt. Go the extra mile. Be generous with your time and talents to help others. Don't worry so much about meeting your physical needs and desires or have anxiety for the future. Don't concern yourselves with storing up earthly treasures. Because where your treasure is, that's where your heart will be too. Put God first in your life and don't value anything above that. Then show your love for God by loving others, including your enemies. We can't do any of these things by ourselves, however. We must continuously pray for God to be in our hearts and thoughts so that we resist the temptation to think and act in our naturally self-centered rather than God-centered ways. As we become more at peace in our hearts, we can then look at how we can bring at least some of that peace to others. Note that we're called to be peacemakers, not simply to wish or hope for peace. Making peace is an active endeavor. Making peace does not mean simply ignoring conflict or appeasing injustice. Indeed, true peace cannot happen without justice for all sides. When we call attention to injustice, we may actually be perceived as troublemakers rather than peacemakers. And that's okay sometimes. Because there are times that we need to speak the truth to those who are ignoring it. We must address issues, but we must speak that truth in love. We must address issues and offer solutions. But we must resist the urge to launch hurtful personal attacks, to engage in name-calling and insults, to make generalized assumptions about people based on what we perceive to be their personal, political, or religious beliefs. And yes, that means we're probably going to have to stop sharing some of those Facebook memes. You know which ones they are. We can stand up for those who are marginalized or who don't have the power or social standing to speak up for themselves. We can refuse to allow anyone to be bullied at home, at work, at school, on the street, online, and we must call it out and stand with them. That may seem like initiating conflict, but as we stand for that justice, we can also offer ideas for a peaceful resolution that benefits all involved. The only way we can do that effectively, though, is to build relationships. We must seek to understand the real source of the aggressor's anger and what solutions might resolve it. We must try to get warring parties to get to know one another, to relate to each other as people, not labels, to understand that each has needs that must be met. We must return the word compromise to our vocabularies and elevate it as a worthy goal rather than simply a lesser alternative to winning. We aren't always going to be successful. In fact, we may fail more often than we succeed. We may invite criticism or insults or even worse. But Jesus prepared us for that too. Blessed are you when people revile you and persecute you and utter all kinds of evil against you falsely for my sake. Rejoice and be glad, for your reward is great in heaven. God sees what you are trying to do and knows what is in your heart. even if other people don't support your efforts. You see, we've become so immune to conflicts, anger, and violence that many people simply cannot conceive of a life where these conflicts either don't exist or are quickly and peacefully resolved. It's almost as if peace were a disease against which we've been vaccinated with repeated doses of anger and violence, to the point where we're certainly not in danger of catching it. We enjoy the exhilaration, power, and sense of superiority that comes with winning. And while losing makes us feel bad, we use it as a motivator to work harder to be a winner, so we don't have to feel that way again. But there's a problem. We've set it up so someone or some group always has to lose. As long as it's not us, we really don't care. If it's consistently us, we get sad and bitter. And then we get angry. And acts of violence, physical or verbal, will often ensue. We act this out in many socially acceptable ways, especially in sports and politics. We've all observed sports fans who react badly when their favorite teams lose, even when they themselves were not playing. In politics, we insult the candidates we oppose, as well as their supporters. And we act as if the candidates we support can do no wrong. Elected officials toe the party line to a fault, even against their own consciences sometimes, because this is what being on the winning side has come to mean. Changing an opinion in the face of new evidence or someone else's reasoned argument is tantamount to treason. Many of us have lost the ability, or at least the willingness, to listen actively when we're in an argument. And yes, I'm definitely convicting myself here. Our very self-esteem is dependent on our certain knowledge that we are right, that we don't really listen to what the other person has to say. Instead, we spend the time when they're speaking thinking of what we're going to say next, and often interrupt them before they're done. We don't converse and share opposing ideas and opinions. We speak only to have our views heard. We really have no desire to listen or understand the other person. One of my favorite quotes from Ralph Waldo Emerson is, "A foolish consistency is the hobgoblin of little minds." To put in 21st century language, what that means is holding on to an idea or opinion just for the sake of being consistent and refusing to examine new evidence or consider that our initial stance may need to be adjusted is foolish and small-minded. As peacemakers who are not subject to worrying about being reelected, we would do well to avoid Emerson's hobgoblin and approach all conflicts with open minds and open hearts. The truth is usually somewhere in the middle anyway. And while I'm not an anti-vaxxer when it comes to real diseases, I am advocating that we do our best to refuse those booster vaccinations of anger and violence. Peace is really something we want to catch. So, as peacemaking children of God, let's pray for guidance, wisdom, and courage to have peaceful hearts that will enable us to show our friends and adversaries alike how to use that love and build relationships that will allow them to reconcile and live at peace with one another. It's possible that when we build those relationships, some may even want to know more about the source of that peace that we hold in our hearts. And we'll have the opportunity to share the good news of God's love with them. At the very least, as the song goes, they'll know we're Christians by our love. Peace can be contagious. Let's take those weapons of greed, jealousy, anger, violence and forge them into new tools to plant and nurture the fruits of the Spirit. Love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, faithfulness, gentleness, self-control. We might not be able to change the whole world, but we can change our part of it one act of peace at a time. And perhaps, if we plant enough fruit, everyone will decide that they would rather not study war anymore, and will decide instead to sit under their own fruit trees and no longer be afraid.